Late evening settled over Boston with a kind of quiet that felt almost ceremonial. In her small apartment overlooking Commonwealth Avenue, Clara Bennett stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker through a thin veil of mist. Tomorrow, she would be married. The thought alone should have filled her with uncomplicated joy, but instead, she felt a strange weight behind her ribs, like something unspoken was waiting just out of sight. She had spent the entire day tying up loose ends, final calls with the florist, confirming the arrival time of her gown, checking on her maid of honor, yet none of it eased her mind. It wasn't nerves about the wedding itself. It was something more delicate, a sense she couldn't fully name. Still, she pressed through it, reminding herself that tomorrow marked the beginning of a new chapter. A good chapter. A stable one. She had just set her phone aside when it buzzed against the surface of her vanity. The name on the screen made her pause. Victoria Whitmore. Her future mother-in-law wasn't someone who reached out casually. Their communication had always been polite, controlled, impeccably phrased, never spontaneous. Clara opened the message, reading each word twice to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. Clara, we'd like to invite you to a small family tradition dinner tonight. Just us, 7:30 p.m., Beacon Hill. That was it. No explanation, no mention of Michael, no warmth. Clara checked the time, just over an hour to get ready, and tried to shake off the sudden chill that settled through her. A family tradition dinner. She had never heard of it before. Michael had never mentioned anything about meeting privately the night before the wedding. In any other family, a pre-wedding dinner sounded normal, even sweet. But with Victoria Whitmore, nothing ever felt entirely straightforward. Still, Clara convinced herself this could be a good thing. Maybe Victoria wanted a private moment to welcome her officially. Maybe this was her attempt at bonding. They had never truly connected. Victoria was warm to guests, but cool toward Clara, as if evaluating her through a lens only she understood. Perhaps tonight would change that. By the time Clara arrived in Beacon Hill, the street lamps had already cast long, golden paths across the brick sidewalks. The Whitmore townhouse rose above the neighborhood like a perfectly preserved artifact, elegant, austere, symmetrical. Its windows glowed softly, revealing glimpses of dark wood paneling and carefully curated art. Clara hesitated on the top step before knocking, taking one last breath of cold evening air. The door opened almost instantly. Victoria Whitmore stood there, immaculate as always. Pearl earrings, a tailored navy dress, posture so straight it almost looked rehearsed. Her smile was polite but tight, as though it had been pressed into place. "Clara, you made it right on time. Please come in." Her tone was smooth, maybe too smooth. Inside, the townhouse felt like stepping back a century. Bookshelves stretching to the ceiling, oil portraits of ancestors, polished floors that reflected warm light. Everything about it whispered old money, old expectations, old rules. Lawrence Whitmore appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, offering a gentle smile. "Clara, lovely to see you. Congratulations ahead of tomorrow." His tone felt genuine, and Clara felt a brief wave of relief. If Victoria was the gatekeeper, Lawrence was the quiet buffer, a softer presence in a house full of edges. But even with his warmth, Clara couldn't ignore the undercurrent running beneath the evening. The house was peaceful, almost serene, yet something inside the air felt tightened, held together like a string pulled too far. Victoria led her deeper into the home with a graceful gesture. "Let's begin, shall we? Tonight is important." The way she said it made Clara's pulse quicken. Calm on the surface, tension underneath. And Clara knew, without understanding how, that this dinner was not what it seemed. The dining room looked as though it had been prepared for a modest celebration. China plates set with precision, crystal glasses reflecting the chandelier's glow, silverware placed as if following a museum exhibit guide. But the moment Clara sat down, she sensed immediately that none of this was meant to celebrate her wedding tomorrow. The air lacked warmth, lacked the subtle joy that typically lingers before a family event. Instead, everything felt staged. Victoria sat at the head of the table, hands folded neatly, posture impeccable. Across from her, Clara felt as though she had taken a seat in front of a panel, one that was waiting to begin. It began quietly. "So Clara," Victoria said, her voice smooth as polished marble, "tell us a bit more about your upbringing. I know the basics, of course, but I want to understand the environment that shaped you." Clara blinked, adjusting her napkin with care. "Of course. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood outside Worcester. My parents both worked in education. My mother taught literature, my father taught history." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, though something in her expression suggested she was marking items off an invisible list. "And your childhood?" she continued. "What sorts of communities were you part of?" Clara smiled politely. Most of it was ordinary: school clubs, neighborhood events, volunteering. Nothing unusual. "I see." The tone was neutral, but the implications were already forming. Victoria leaned back slightly, studying Clara with analytical interest. "And your parents? What circles did they belong to socially? Academic, professional, philanthropic?" Clara hesitated for half a second. "They weren't really part of formal circles, just hardworking, dedicated people." Victoria's brows lifted almost imperceptibly, a movement small enough to pass unnoticed if Clara hadn't been watching closely. The questioning continued. "You studied literature, correct? At a state university?" "Yes," Clara said, keeping her smile steady. "And have you spent time abroad? Exposure to different cultures is vital in the Whitmore tradition." "I spent a semester in England during college." "And beyond that?" "No," Clara said softly. Victoria tapped a manicured nail against the stem of her glass. "And how familiar are you with Boston's cultural institutions? The symphony, the MFA, the historical societies?" "I visited several times," Clara answered, "though not regularly." "Not regularly." Victoria repeated the words like a quiet diagnosis. Throughout it all, Lawrence watched with an expression that hovered somewhere between curiosity and mild discomfort, his fork moving absently through his food. He wasn't hostile, but he wasn't intervening either. He simply observed, as though this was a process he had seen play out before. The questions sharpened with each passing minute, not overtly insulting, but guiding Clara toward a narrow path where any answer felt insufficient. "What were your parents' educational backgrounds? How connected is your family within Massachusetts? Would you say you had access to intellectual refinement growing up? What do you consider your cultural strengths?" Each question sounded polite enough, wrapped in the softness of a hostess's voice, but the undertone was clear: evaluation, classification, measurement. Clara answered with patience, holding herself together, but the feeling of being cornered crept steadily up her spine. Every polite smile she offered felt more like armor. She wasn't sure who she was defending herself from, Victoria or the version of herself Victoria seemed determined to construct. And slowly, unmistakably, the truth settled in. This was not a welcome dinner. It was an assessment, a psychological test dressed in candlelight and crystal. And Clara realized she was being measured not for who she was, but for whether she fit a mold someone else had decided she should fill. When the plates from the first course were cleared, Victoria folded her hands elegantly on the table, her expression shifting ever so slightly. It was still polite, still controlled, but sharpened, like a door closing with the softest click. Clara sensed the change immediately. "There's something we traditionally do in the Whitmore family," Victoria began, her tone almost ceremonial. "A kind of cultural assessment, you might call it. Every woman who joins our family participates in it before the wedding." Clara blinked, unsure whether to smile or brace herself. "An assessment?" "Nothing formal," Victoria said quickly, though the glint in her eyes argued otherwise. "Just a conversation, a way for us to ensure that our future daughters-in-law share the intellectual foundation our family values. Lawrence shifted in his chair, clearing his throat lightly. He didn't speak, but his subtle discomfort hung in the air like a warning. Victoria pressed on. Let's begin with something simple. Classical literature. Which authors do you consider most formative? Clara straightened, choosing her words carefully. For me, the Bronte sisters were foundational, and Tolstoy, especially in my late teens. A flicker of surprise crossed Victoria's face. Tolstoy? That's ambitious. Clara nodded gently. His exploration of moral conflict always stayed with me. Victoria recovered quickly, offering a tight smile. And what about American transcendentalism? Emerson, Thoreau? Which of their works resonate with you? Clara didn't hesitate. I've always been drawn to Thoreau's journals more than his formal essays. There's a rawness there that feels more honest. Lawrence actually looked up at that, his brows lifting. It was the first sign of genuine interest he'd shown all evening. Victoria continued, but something in her posture shifted, just slightly stiffer, slightly more guarded. Shakespeare, she said. Your favorite play? Coriolanus, Clara replied. It's underappreciated. The political tension is fascinating. That answer unsettled Victoria in a way she couldn't hide. Most people choose the comedies, she murmured. I like the way Shakespeare explores pride, Clara said softly. Victoria moved on quickly. And foundational political philosophy? Locke? Rousseau? Which thinker shaped your worldview most strongly? Clara paused for a thoughtful moment. Probably John Stuart Mill, particularly his writing on liberty and the responsibility of society toward the individual. Another pause followed, this one heavier. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but the softness behind it evaporated completely. Well, she said after a moment, that's impressive. But it wasn't a compliment. It sounded like a diagnosis she didn't agree with. She picked up her water glass, turning it slightly between her fingers. Her tone remained perfectly civil, yet every question that followed grew more pointed. And how regularly do you engage with Boston's cultural community? The Athenaeum, the Boston Philharmonic, the lecture circuits? I attend what I can, Clara replied. My work schedule doesn't always allow it, but I do make time. Just that. A single sound, delicate but judgmental. Victoria pressed on, but with each answer Clara gave. Accurate, thoughtful, confident, the undercurrent of irritation beneath Victoria's refined exterior grew stronger. She had expected Clara to stumble. She had expected Clara to be intimidated. She had expected Clara to reveal herself as unworthy. Instead, Clara matched every question with quiet intelligence. The mask slipped only a little, but Clara saw it, a tightening around the eyes, a slight hardening of the jaw, a polite smile stretched just a degree too far. In that moment, Clara understood something important. The hostility, she realized, had been there all along, wrapped in sophistication, hidden beneath fine manners and old money grace. And now, as Clara continued answering steadily, it was finally beginning to show. The dining room had grown quieter, the clinking of silverware replaced by an attentive stillness. It felt as though Victoria had been waiting for just the right moment to shift into the next phase of her assessment. When the housekeeper cleared away the last plates, Victoria rose from her seat with a kind of ceremonial calm, walking toward a cabinet near the far wall. She opened a drawer and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with the Whitmore family crest. Then, with an elegance that bordered on theatrical, she returned to the table and placed it gently in front of Clara. Inside was a monogrammed stationery set, ivory paper, gold-edged, embossed with the Whitmore name at the top. Clara blinked. The gesture felt strangely formal, almost archaic. Victoria's voice floated across the table, carrying the softness of politeness, but none of its sincerity. We have one final tradition, she said. All women entering the Whitmore family write a brief reflection for our archives, a statement of sorts about how you intend to uphold the Whitmore legacy. The words were so carefully phrased, so elegantly wrapped, that it took Clara a moment to feel the sting beneath them. It wasn't a request, it was a command. And it wasn't meant to include her, it was meant to expose her. A writing test disguised as ceremony, a final chance for Clara to prove she belonged, or, more realistically, to be reminded that she did not. Clara sat up straighter, accepting the fountain pen Victoria slid across the table. The weight of it felt disproportionate to its purpose, as though she were being handed something sacred rather than a tool for humiliation. Victoria watched her with poised anticipation. Lawrence shifted quietly, looking as though he wished he were anywhere else. Clara lowered her gaze to the pristine paper and began writing. She did not write about legacy in the way Victoria expected. She did not promise to adopt the rigid traditions of an old Boston family or pledge devotion to their name. Instead, she wrote about the values she believed were truly worth preserving: equality, empathy, compassion, independent thought, and the courage to act with integrity even when others demand conformity. Her script flowed elegantly, each sentence clear and intentional. She wrote not as someone begging for approval, but as someone who understood her worth, someone with a quiet strength that could not be shaped or owned. When she finished, she set down the pen and pushed the sheet gently toward Victoria. Victoria accepted it with the reverence of someone handling a contract. She read silently, eyes scanning each line, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly. The deeper she read, the more composed she became, but it was a forced composure, stretched thin. Clara watched the transformation with an unsettling clarity. This was the turning point, the exact moment Victoria realized the truth she had been trying to avoid all evening. Clara would not bend to her. Clara would not shrink. Clara would not be shaped into the kind of compliant daughter-in-law the Whitmore name demanded. When Victoria finally placed the paper down, her smile was still there, but something cold had settled beneath it. The test had not failed. It had simply revealed the very thing Victoria feared most, that Clara, with her quiet intellect and steady grace, could not be controlled. And in that realization, the entire dynamic of the evening shifted. The moment Victoria finished reading Clara's reflection, the room shifted in a way that felt almost physical. The polite surface of the evening, thin, brittle, carefully maintained, finally cracked. Victoria stood, smoothing the front of her tailored dress, and offered Lawrence a faint but unmistakable gesture toward the doorway. "Dear, would you give us a moment?" Lawrence hesitated just long enough for the tension to register. His eyes flicked from Victoria to Clara, troubled, apologetic, but he obeyed anyway. "Of course," he murmured, and stepped quietly out of the room. When the door closed behind him, Victoria exhaled a slow, controlled breath. Every hint of hospitality, every curated softness drained from her posture. What remained was a sharper, colder presence, still elegant but stripped of civility. "Clara," she said, her voice lower now, smoother in a way that made it more dangerous. "I think it's time we speak plainly." Clara felt her pulse climb, but kept her expression steady. Victoria picked up the sheet of stationery one more time, tapping a manicured finger against the lines Clara had written. "This is lovely, thoughtful, idealistic." A pause. "And entirely incompatible with what it means to be a Whitmore." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but Victoria continued, her tone polite yet slicing. "You seem like a good young woman, intelligent, earnest." She tilted her head, studying Clara as though evaluating a painting she'd already decided not to buy. "But you must understand something. Our family is not meant to mix with people from outside our world." The words landed with a cold precision, delivered as though they were simply facts of nature, unchangeable, unquestionable. Clara felt the sting immediately. It was sharp, swift, and humiliating in a way that lodged itself beneath her ribs. She forced herself to stay composed, to breathe, to hold the line of her posture. Victoria went on, her voice still calm, still dressed in refinement. There is a certain order to things, a hierarchy. The Whitmore legacy is built on generations of education, culture, and social alignment. She offered a faint, calculated smile. People can marry upward or downward, of course, but they cannot cross certain boundaries. The next sentence delivered the true blow. My mother used to say, you can polish a stone for years, it will never become a pearl. The idiom slid across the table like a quiet verdict, beautifully worded, brutally intended. Clara felt something inside her clench. Her throat tightened, her stomach burned, but outwardly she didn't flinch. She kept her chin lifted, her eyes steady, even as the humiliation seeped deep. Somewhere down the hall she heard Michael's voice, light, casual, mid-conversation. He was on a call, oblivious to everything unfolding, oblivious, or choosing not to intervene. She couldn't tell which hurt more. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice to a final, precise whisper. You may marry my son, Clara, but you will never be one of us. Silence followed, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed against Clara's skin. She swallowed, nodded once, and rose from her seat. Thank you for the evening, she managed. Victoria didn't respond. Clara walked out of the townhouse with her heartbeat thudding painfully against her ribs. The cold air of Beacon Hill hit her cheeks, but it did nothing to steady her. It was suddenly painfully clear. This family did not see her as a future daughter-in-law. They saw her as an intruder. And for the first time, she wondered what exactly she was marrying into. Morning light spilled across Boston with a clarity that made everything look almost unreal. The sky was cloudless, the air crisp, and the city seemed to move with a gentle hum, as if acknowledging the gravity of the day. Flowers arrived in pale cream and soft blush tones. The string quartet tuned their instruments on the green lawn, and the venue, an elegant garden terrace near the Charles River, seemed to glow with the kind of perfection people always imagine for their wedding. It should have been the happiest morning of Clara's life. She stood in the dressing suite, veil draped over her arm, peering at her reflection while a hairstylist pinned the final curls into place. Her gown was stunning, simple, timeless, the kind of dress that would still look beautiful decades from now. But beneath the beauty, beneath the soft makeup and the polished confidence, something inside her felt unsettled. She kept replaying Victoria's words from the night before. You will never be one of us. They lingered like a bruise hidden beneath silk. Clara closed her eyes and inhaled slowly. Today is a new start, she told herself, a celebration, a moment to begin fresh. She tried to believe it, tried to convince herself that whatever happened at the townhouse belonged to the past. When she stepped into the garden to greet guests, she found Victoria already mingling effortlessly among them. Every gesture was warm, poised, impeccably timed. She laughed lightly at compliments, spoke glowingly of Clara, and greeted everyone as though she had always adored her future daughter-in-law. Not a trace of last night remained on her face. She approached Clara with flawless grace, touching her arm lightly. You look exquisite, my dear, truly radiant. The words were delivered with such sincerity that any outsider would have believed them wholeheartedly. But Clara felt the hollowness beneath the surface. She thanked Victoria politely, keeping her smile measured. Lawrence arrived a moment later, offering Clara a quiet nod before leaning in slightly. Don't mind her, he murmured, his tone gentle, almost apologetic. She has her ways. Try not to take things personally. Clara studied his face, searching for something, support, honesty, perhaps even regret, but all she found was a resigned softness. the expression of a man accustomed to smoothing over the fractures left by someone else. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael arrived with a grin, his tuxedo crisp, his eyes bright with excitement. He wrapped an arm around Clara's waist, oblivious to the layers beneath her smile. "Ready for forever?" he teased. She nodded, hoping he didn't notice the slight tightness in her expression. He didn't. He never did. As the ceremony began, Clara tried to focus on the beauty surrounding her. The flowers swaying gently, the soft music filling the air, the way Michael looked at her as if nothing existed beyond this moment. She held on to those pieces of joy, used them as anchors to keep herself steady. But even as she exchanged vows, even as applause rippled through the crowd, that quiet ache remained. She felt split in two, one part swept up in the romance and celebration, the other still standing in a Beacon Hill dining room, hearing a woman tell her she would never belong. During the reception, Victoria maintained her flawless facade, complimenting the decor, hugging relatives, and offering Clara polite, measured praise. Anyone watching would have thought the Whitmore matriarch adored her new daughter-in-law. Only Clara knew the truth tucked behind the smile. By the end of the night, as the last guests drifted away and the world fell quiet again, Clara felt the full weight of the day settle over her. She was married, wrapped in beauty, love, and celebration. And yet, beneath it all, a dread she couldn't name continued to whisper at the edges of her joy. By early evening, after the last photos were taken and the final guests drifted away from the reception, Michael suggested they stop by his parents' home for a small family gathering. Clara hesitated for a breath, just long enough to remember the night before, but she forced herself to nod. It was tradition, he said, just family, just a quiet way to end the night. The Whitmore townhouse looked even more imposing in the warm glow of the street lamps. Inside, only a handful of close relatives had gathered, an uncle, 2 aunts, a cousin or 2. The atmosphere was relaxed in the way old money families often are. Soft laughter, murmurs over wine, a few classical pieces drifting from a speaker tucked somewhere out of sight. Victoria glided into the foyer the moment Clara and Michael stepped inside, her timing perfect, her smile luminous. "There you are. Everyone's been waiting to congratulate you." Her tone was warm in a way that felt curated, as if she had rehearsed every syllable. Clara returned the smile, though her heart tightened with caution. She reminded herself, tonight is different. There are witnesses. There is safety in numbers. But that assumption lasted only minutes. Once the couple joined the others in the living room, crystal glasses in hand, everyone offering toasts and compliments, Victoria slowly began to steer the conversation. At first, the comments seemed harmless. How lovely Clara looked walking down the aisle. How beautifully she spoke her vows. How gracefully she fit into the day. But beneath each compliment lay something sharper, something edged in contrast to the perfection she displayed. And then, with impeccable timing, Victoria let her voice lift just a bit louder, ensuring the nearby aunts and cousins could hear. "You know," she said lightly, "my mother used to say, you can polish a stone for years. It will never become a pearl. Such a funny old expression, isn't it?" A ripple of laughter followed, not loud, but enough. Enough for Clara to know the comment had landed exactly where Victoria intended. Enough to feel the sting spread through her chest, familiar and fresh all at once. Clara managed a small breath, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Her pulse fluttered, her composure wobbling beneath the weight of the moment. She kept her gaze steady, refusing to let her face betray the hurt, but inside, something trembled. One of the aunts leaned in with a smirk. "Oh, Victoria, you and your mother's sayings." More quiet laughter. Another cousin joined in. Michael, standing beside Clara, didn't seem to register the subtext at all. Clara felt her throat tighten. The humiliation wrapped around her like invisible wire, sharp and constricting. She could feel her composure beginning to crack, an ache swelling behind her eyes, her breath catching in her chest. She swallowed hard. She could speak. She could confront. She could shatter the glass she was holding and let every buried emotion flood the room. But she didn't. Instead, Clara straightened her posture, set her glass gently on the table beside her, and offered a small, measured smile, one that carried neither rage nor surrender, only dignity. "I suppose every family has sayings that stay with them," she said softly. Her grace unsettled Victoria, far more than any outburst could have. The room quieted. Just for a moment, as Clara's poise cut cleanly through the tension. But the damage had been done. The second humiliation delivered, witnessed, absorbed, and the emotional pressure mirrored the truth of the original scene exactly. This was not acceptance. This was a warning, a boundary drawn in velvet but meant to cut. By the time the last relative slipped into their coats and stepped out into the quiet Beacon Hill night, the townhouse had fallen into an almost ceremonial silence. The air felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something inevitable to unfold. Michael excused himself to answer a work call, another perfectly timed escape, and disappeared down the hall, leaving Clara alone in the living room with Victoria and Lawrence. Victoria didn't waste a second. She stepped closer. Smoothing the fabric of her dress, her expression composed in a way that felt rehearsed, and then with the same genteel tone she had used the night before, she delivered the familiar blow. "You handled yourself well this evening," she said softly, "but I want to be perfectly clear, Clara. No matter how you present yourself, a stone polished is still a stone. It will never be a pearl." She didn't bother disguising the meaning anymore. This time, it wasn't wrapped in public charm. It was aimed directly at Clara, a quiet dagger delivered without hesitation. Clara inhaled, letting the words settle, not because she accepted them, but because she wanted to feel their weight one final time before letting them go. The hurt was sharp, but clarity bloomed just behind it. She had spent 2 days being prodded, measured, dismissed. Now, the balance shifted. She lifted her gaze and met Victoria's eyes evenly. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and steady, not raised, not trembling, simply certain. "You're right," Clara said softly. "A stone will never become a pearl." She paused, letting the words breathe. But sometimes, the only reason a pearl seems valuable is because someone convinced the world to look past what it really is. Victoria blinked. "What are you implying?" Clara didn't waver. Her expression was serene, almost gentle, but there was a razor edge beneath her words, precise, elegant, devastating. "Pearls only shine because they're trapped under layers," Clara continued. "Layer after layer, hiding what's inside. A stone, on the other hand, isn't afraid to be seen for what it is." Lawrence's glass slipped from his hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. He didn't even attempt to pick it up. Victoria froze, her mouth parting slightly, not in anger but in shock. For the first time since Clara had met her, the woman whose life revolved around poise and control found herself with neither. Clara delivered the final line with quiet grace, the Americanized counterpart of the French comeback from the original story, the twist that turned the entire dynamic on its head. "You've spent so long polishing the world around you, Victoria. I'm afraid you've mistaken shine for substance." Silence struck the room like a sudden gust of cold air. Victoria stared at her, eyes wide, the color draining from her face. Humiliation washed over her in slow, undeniable waves. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to form a single coherent response. Her carefully curated elegance, her weapon of choice, had been dismantled in a single, unshaken breath. Lawrence looked between them helplessly, his expression torn between admiration for Clara's restraint and dread over the fallout he knew would come. Clara didn't prolong the moment. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped back, lifted her chin, and allowed the truth to sit in the air exactly as it was. Victoria Whitmore, unshaken matriarch, arbiter of class and culture, had been undone by the very weapon she tried to use against someone else. And this, precisely as in the original story, was the turning point, the core twist, the moment everything changed. Michael walked back into the living room with the casual ease of someone returning from an ordinary phone call, not realizing he was stepping into the aftermath of a silent earthquake. His smile faded almost instantly. Victoria stood rigid, colorless. Lawrence hovered near the fireplace, visibly shaken. Clara remained composed, but still, her expression unreadable. "What happened?" Michael asked, looking from his mother to his wife. "Why does the room feel like someone died?" Victoria recovered first, or tried to. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin with practiced elegance. "Nothing of consequence," she said, her voice brittle beneath its polished tone. "Clara simply chose a rather disrespectful way to end the evening." Clara felt the familiar sting of that word. Disrespectful, used so casually, so strategically. Michael frowned. Disrespectful? Clara? He turned toward his wife, confusion tightening his features. "What is she talking about?" Victoria cut in before Clara could answer. "She took it upon herself to lecture me, on legacy, on family, on substance." She forced a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "On what it means to be a Whitmore. It was inappropriate." Lawrence flinched at the word, but again said nothing. Clara inhaled slowly, choosing clarity over emotion. "Michael, I didn't lecture your mother. I responded to something she said, something she has been saying, directly and indirectly, since last night." Michael turned to her fully now, bewildered. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze evenly. "Your mother invited me to dinner yesterday. She questioned me about my background, my parents, my education, my place in the world. She tested me, literature, philosophy, culture. Then she had me write a reflection to uphold the Whitmore legacy." Michael's brows furrowed, defensive confusion forming. "She tests everyone. It's her way of getting to know people." Clara held his gaze steady. "No, it wasn't about knowing me. It was about measuring me. And tonight she repeated an insult she used before, calling me a stone that can never become a pearl." She gestured lightly toward Victoria. "She said it again, in front of your relatives." Michael's confusion hardened into disbelief, the easiest path. "Mom wouldn't say something like that." "Yes," Clara replied gently. "She would, and she did." Victoria's lips tightened. "Michael, she's exaggerating." Clara shook her head, refusing to let the moment dissolve into blurred truth. "I'm not exaggerating. I'm telling you exactly what happened." Michael looked between the two women, the mother he had never challenged and the wife he believed he understood. His silence stretched, thickening the room. "Michael," Clara said, her voice soft but unbreakable, "do you honestly think I would invent something like this on our wedding day?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Clara felt something inside her begin to close. Victoria stepped forward slightly, touching Michael's arm. "Darling, you don't have to choose sides. She's clearly overwhelmed. Weddings are emotional." The dismissal, the minimizing, the precision of it, it landed exactly where Victoria intended. Michael didn't pull away. He didn't defend Clara. He didn't question his mother. He simply stood there, caught between discomfort and loyalty, unable to move toward his wife. Clara felt the truth settle into her like a final puzzle piece snapping into place. If this was how he reacted now, on the first night of their marriage, what would the rest of their life look like? She exhaled softly. "I think I'm going to go." Michael blinked. "Go? Go where?" "Home," Clara said. "My home." She walked past him, past the glittering portraits on the walls, past the old money polish and the illusions she had tried so hard to tolerate. The night air outside hit her face like a cleansing wind. Her heart was aching, fractured, raw, but her mind was steady, clearer than it had been in days. She wasn't running. She was leaving a place she finally understood she would never belong. 3 months passed, carrying winter away and replacing Boston's icy mornings with the first hesitant signs of spring. Trees along Commonwealth Avenue began to bud. Evenings lingered with a little more light. The city felt gentler somehow. Clara had changed too, quietly, steadily, in ways most people wouldn't notice at first glance. She had moved back into her small apartment near Back Bay, the one she'd lived in before everything with the Whitmores began. On her first night there, she placed a single lamp beside her bed, opened the windows despite the cold, and let the silence settle around her without fear. It wasn't loneliness, it was space, room to breathe, to think, to rebuild. Her work flourished. She took on new projects at the publishing house, volunteered for assignments she had once been too cautious to accept, and found herself leaning into her talents with a confidence she didn't realize she had been missing. Her colleagues noticed the shift, her posture straighter, her voice steadier, her ideas sharper. There was no dramatic transformation, no reinvention, just growth, steady, honest, earned. In quiet moments, she found herself thinking about the Whitmores, not with anger, not with longing, but with clarity. She saw the truth of that world now, the polished veneer, the rules, the unspoken hierarchies, the illusions that kept everything shimmering on the surface, while hollow underneath. 3 months of distance had turned the Whitmore name into something she could observe without emotional weight, like a museum artifact behind glass. She no longer ached when she remembered Victoria's words. The sting had softened into understanding. Some people lived their entire lives inside shells of their own making, mistaking restriction for refinement. And she no longer felt the urge to prove anything. Rumors eventually made their way through Boston's social circles. Whispers about the dinner, about the assessment, about the idiom Victoria had repeated in front of guests. People talked, discreetly of course, the way old money families always did, behind teacups between charity events, over quiet lunches in Beacon Hill cafes. Clara didn't participate. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't fuel the gossip. She simply lived her life. One afternoon in late March, Michael showed up outside her building. He looked smaller somehow, less confident, less certain of the world he came from. He held his jacket awkwardly over one arm, shifting from foot to foot as she approached. "Clara," he began, voice strained, "can we talk?" She nodded once and stepped outside with him. They walked a short distance down the street, the wind carrying loose petals from early cherry blossoms. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about what she said, about what happened. I should have listened. I should have defended you." Clara didn't interrupt. She let him speak. "I miss you," he added. "I want to fix this. Can we try again?" She studied him gently. Michael wasn't cruel. He wasn't malicious. He was simply unprepared, unwilling to stand on his own when it mattered. And she finally understood that asking him to change would be asking him to become someone he had never been allowed to be. "Michael," she said softly, "I don't hate you. I never did." She paused. "But I'm not going back." He inhaled, defeated. "So that's it?" "That's it," she said, not with bitterness, but with peace. After he left, Clara felt no triumph, no ache, no lingering uncertainty, only completion. In the weeks that followed, she began exploring new corners of her life, taking a pottery class, attending small book readings in Cambridge, grabbing coffee with colleagues she had barely known before. She made new friends, built new routines, and allowed her identity to expand beyond the roles she had once tried to fit into. There was no rush, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet awakening, a soft but steady return to herself. On a warm April morning, Clara walked along the Charles River, the sunlight glinting off the water, the breeze tugging gently at her hair. She paused by the railing, breathing in the calm. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the Whitmore townhouse months ago. She was stronger, clearer, unshaken. And as the city moved gently around her, she realized something profound. The life she wanted didn't require permission. It required presence, her own. She smiled, letting the moment root itself quietly in her chest. Not revenge, not vindication, just resolve. Exactly as the story was always meant to end.